Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I want to go over the format of the NASM exam. I'm going to go over how I scheduled my exam, where I took the exam, and then just the format overall of what to expect, and answer a few questions as well. In order to schedule your exam, you can schedule it on the PSI website or you can call in and schedule it. I tried scheduling it online, but I kept running into an issue where I couldn't get past a certain screen, so I ended up just calling in and they scheduled it for me. The closest testing center to me is in Boca Raton at the FAU Florida Atlantic University campus, so that's where I ended up taking my exam. And I gave myself about an hour to get there. It's really not that far from me. It's just a few exits up the road on the highway. But I give myself an hour just because I wanted to make sure I got there early and I didn't know what the whole process was for signing in. So I got there early. I ended up getting there about 30 minutes early. So I asked the woman if I could kind of review my notes before I took the exam, and she said I couldn't study in the testing area. So I ended up stepping out into the lobby and I reviewed my notes really quick, and then I went back into the testing center and they had me fill out this form saying that I would abide by the rules of the testing center. I had to review it and sign it, and then they had me take off my watch and I had to put my personal belongings in a locker and keep my license and the locker key with me. And so that's all I had walking into the testing room. And they also checked my pockets before I walked in to make sure I didn't have anything, which I thought was really weird. After she checked my pockets, we walked in, and again, I only had my license and the actual locker key with me in the testing room. And she already had me logged into a computer. She had like my number from NASM, whatever my ID number was. And yeah, I was signed in. So it is a computer format. I thought it was going to be like a test where you kind of bubble in the numbers or the letters in a Scantron sheet, and they were going to put that in, but no, everything's on the computer. So yeah, so on the computer, basically it's going to have you go through like a few questions just so you can get familiar with the format of what to do. And again, I don't know if I've mentioned this in any of my previous videos, but it is a 2-hour exam and it has 120 questions. Now, 20 of the questions don't count. They're like test questions. I know like on the NASM study guide, they only had for the practice exams, they were only 100 questions long, but on the real exam, there's going to be 120 questions, but 20 of them do not count. They're just test questions. And so, yeah, so as soon as I was done with the tutorial of how to use the online program, I began my exam, and all the way at the top of the exam, it's going to show you when you're doing, the tutorial, but it had where you could, move on to the next question, or you could go back, or you could mark a question, like if you wanted to go back to it later. So any questions that I really didn't understand, or, I was kind of iffy on the answer, like it could have been like 2 answers, I marked those questions and I went through the entire exam, and once I was done with the exam, I went back to the questions that I marked. And so I marked, I want to say 3 questions. And so I knew 20 were test questions. I was really confident on the ones that I did answer correctly, like I knew those. So I had a good idea that, the ones that I marked were maybe test questions that were kind of harder than I thought, or I was hoping at least. Anyways, I went back through the marked questions. I want to say I only changed a few, and then, I finished my exam, and then when I left the testing center, I went and got my personal items, returned the locker key, and then the woman handed me my the sheet of paper that tells you whether you pass or not. She put it face down on the counter, and so I was nervous. I was like, oh no. And so I grabbed it, and I, kind of scurried myself out of the testing center, and right across from the testing center was the women's restroom. So I went into the restroom. It was so silly. I went to the restroom, and I went to a stall, and then I looked at it, and it said pass, and I was so excited. I was like squealing and jumping in a stall by myself. And yeah. And then I ended up calling my friends and family and sharing the good news as I was on my way home. But yeah, so that's basically the whole process of the exam. Now, for my last video, I did say what was on the exam, to study the assessments, the domains, the overactive and underactive muscles, and all of that is still true. That's what I ran into the exam. I ran into a lot of the same questions that were I don't want to say the same questions, but I ran into a lot of questions that were worded the same, like the practice exams in the NASM study guide. So I feel really confident just like that. They had the 6 domains, they had 2 practice exams, and then an actual final exam on the NASM study guide course. And I feel like those are true, a true format of what to expect in the real exam. They're very similar. The questions were different, don't get me wrong, but just the format and the wording of the questions are very similar. And so I felt comfortable taking the exam. I felt like I was taking another practice exam. I took it a little bit more seriously. I read the questions thoroughly, and I read them twice, double checked my answers, but I felt comfortable. And the exam, like I said, it was 2 hours long, and so it took me about an hour and 20 minutes to take the exam, and that's with me going back and checking my marked answers. But yeah. So that's all I have as far as feedback of, like, you know, leading up to the exam, scheduling it, going to it, and like what to expect. You know, it's a computer-based exam, and you know, when you get your score, it just says like whether you passed or failed. It has like your name, your address, the date that you took the exam, whether you passed or not. If you passed, like at the bottom, which is what I posted on social media, was like, hey, you know, you passed NASM, like you passed, congratulations, you passed the NASM National Academy Sports Medicine exam, and it says all that good stuff. And so that's what I posted on social media, just because I didn't want to share, like, you know, the top portion where I had my address and stuff. But yeah, like, I don't know, I'm really happy, I'm excited, and if I could just like pay it forward to any of you that are studying for NASM or have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. And I actually do have a few questions from my last video. Taylor Leonardi, I hope I'm saying that right, she did ask me a few questions, and so I'm going to address them now. And again, if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Like, I want to pay it forward for anybody that's currently studying for NASM or about to take the exam, and just if I can help in any way, let me know. So Taylor asked, how were the questions worded? So the questions were worded very similar to the practice exams on the NASM study guide. Like I said, I felt really comfortable going through the actual exam. I felt like I was taking another practice exam. So they're worded exactly the same. They just, what I thought was kind of tricky was that they had a lot of questions about the assessments, especially like the squat assessment, overhead squat assessment. But for the overactive and underactive muscles, they kind of use the words interchangeably, like shortened, lengthened, under and overactive. So definitely pay attention to that, like, you know, when you're reading the question, they kind of use those terms interchangeably, which I took note when I was taking the exam. And then what topics were on the exam? The same topics that I discussed in my last video, just, you know, they had a few questions regarding, like, you know, what is the term? You know, like they gave the definition of a word from the textbook, and, you know, you had to pick which word it was. But a lot of it was very similar to the practice exam. Like, yeah, I feel like I'm not going to be very helpful in answering the next couple of questions. But they really were. It was so similar to the practice exam. Like, yeah. So, you know, the topics were the assessments, the overactive, underactive muscles. They had a few, like, questions regarding, you know, like, what's the vocabulary word, basically, like, what's the terminology. But a lot of the questions were very similar to the practice exam. They weren't exact, but just they were formatted very similar. How many questions from each chapter? I don't know that off the top of my head, to be honest. Like, there's 120 questions, but like, as long as you have a good overview of the entire textbook and you feel comfortable, I feel like you'll be able to pass the exam no problem. What were the majority of the questions on? I feel like a lot of the questions were like the overactive and underactive muscles in the assessments. Like in my opinion, that's what I felt like, at least the ones that I had marked, and I went back through just a second time just to be sure. Like, yeah, and then there was a lot of questions about like the nervous system, the skeletal system, the muscles. It was a little bit of everything. Like, I can't say there was one chapter more was covered more than another. Like, it was just a mixture of all of them. And then what to mainly focus on in my last video, just you know, out of all the domains, focus on the ones that weigh heavier, which I believe are domains 3 and 4. I did 3, 4, and another one. Like, I think one was like 22, 21, and then like 18%. As far as how much they weighed on the exam. And so those 3 domains I focused on a lot when I went studying, but I did still review all the other ones. And yeah, so I hope I answered your questions, Taylor. I'm so sorry. It's kind of vague, but it's like, I don't really remember. It's been like, I want to say a week and a half now, so I don't really remember all of what was on the exam as far as the specific questions and specific chapters, but they were very similar to the practice exams from the NASM guided study. So I feel really I felt confident, like, you know, going a few questions into, like, being 5 questions into the exam, I felt like I was taking another practice exam, and I felt comfortable. So as long as you get those down pat, like, you will be fine. Like what I did when I was doing the practice exams from the NASM study guide, I took them once, like I studied, and then I took them once, and if I had any questions wrong, like I went back to those questions. I physically went to where the answer was in the textbook, and I made sure I knew it like the back of my hand. And I did that for every question I got wrong. And then I would take the practice, and then I took the practice exam a second time, and then I would get either like 100%, or, you know, if I got a few wrong, I would go back to the ones that I got wrong and see, like, you know, what am I not getting? So I did that for every practice exam, and then for the final exam, they only allow you to take it once. But you know, I did that for all of the practice exams that I took on the NASM study guide. Like, I took the exam, if I got any wrong, I went back to the textbook, found the answer, highlighted it, took a note, you know, read it, took a mental note, or, you know, tagged it, and then I took the test. I would take the exam or the test again, and then, you know, make sure I got 100% basically. So yeah. So I hope that was helpful. If you guys have any other questions, please leave them down in the comments down below. But yeah, so that's really all I have for you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any other questions, leave them down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys. Alright guys, so I don't know if you remember, but I said I was going to make it rain with my index cards once I passed my NASM exam, and I decided to do it on top of Xena. And honestly, like, it was a total fail. Like, they were thicker than I thought, and so they were literally just like falling on her, and she was looking at me like, what are you doing? Like, what are these? But again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.